And let me break it down into the few bits that I was able to understand. So one is there is a premise. We are assuming that it is the fight for equality which is required. And so we assume that inequality is leading to violence against women. So that's the first part that we must understand. And the second part is, what is the root cause of violence against women? So far, we recognize it as social, behavioral, attitudinal causes. But are there biological bases for people, certain women especially, attracting violent nature, violent behavior into their spaces? And that is something I will elaborate and speak about. The first part, why do we assume that equality is the way to go about things, and that societies that are more equal, and we have often assumed that in the United States, they are far more gender equal than we are here in India, we assume that things are better there. So in America, the statistics in the American websites, this is what they say. 1 in every 6 American women has experienced rape. And 1 in every 33 American men have also experienced rape. 1 out of every 10 cases of rape are of men. Is this what we are aspiring for in the name of equality? See, if equality, the way the West understands it, has to happen, then either men should start menstruating or women should stop menstruating. That is the fact of the matter. We are talking about 2 species, parts of 2 species that are biologically unique on their own. How can we use this loose term like equality and then have the same rules for both? If you look at our Indian system, we had the Smritis, Manu Smriti and the others, which spoke about specific rules for men and specific rules for women. These were not based on social conditions. These were based on a finer understanding of the biological difference of men and women. And I'll give you a few examples that will make this clearer. I spoke about how men should either menstruate, which we know isn't happening anytime soon. But it is happening that women's menstrual cycles are disrupting to such an extent that many of them no longer bleed normally. So what happens when their cycles are disrupted? One of the things that we've all seen around us is an increase in the male hormone called testosterone. And the condition that comes with it, which is PCOD, it has become increasingly common among working women world over. What causes it? Yesterday, I was just studying up the biological basis of these things, and one interesting study gave evidence of something that Ayurveda always knew and spoke about, and that is when women engage in behavior that is largely of the masculine sort, there is an increase in testosterone. What that means is when they are in fields of work that make them more competitive, make them more aggressive, that phase, in fact, the study actually showed that a game of chess increased the testosterone levels in women. Just a game of chess. We're not even talking about something that was physically, aggressive. Chess. Why? The spirit of competition. For that to play out, the body works out certain things internally. Your adrenaline rush happens. Testosterone is a hormone that gives you that aggressive, competitive edge. Now, typically, women have much lower concentration of testosterone than men because it's a male hormone. And if your ovaries are functioning well, it gets converted into the female hormone called estrogen. But what happens in this case is, because our cycles are so sensitive, even a slight increase in testosterone upsets our entire menstrual cycle. And that is why more and more women, in the pursuit of equality, are imitating male behavior. And we are losing the inherent femininity and becoming more masculine. That is what equality requires of us. This is something for us to know by observing ourselves and people around us. No woman who is aggressive by nature will have a smooth menstrual cycle. It's a given. Women's mental health and menstrual health are so closely linked, and women's overall health is so dependent on these sensitive menstrual cycles. Even in the corporate sphere, the simple thing of night shifts, even for men, it throws their entire natural rhythm out of balance. You have digestive issues. For women, when they do night shifts, it throws their menstrual cycles completely out of balance. If you do a sample study of working women who are in very competitive, aggressive, ambition-driven roles versus rural women who might be farm laborers, and just compare their overall menstrual and reproductive health, you will find that the rural women, even though they're doing more physically exerting work, have better menstrual health compared to the urban corporate women. Because the nature of the corporate work environment is about economic productivity. And economic success is considered as the ultimate aim of life. So women are having to prioritize that over their own inherent feminine quality. They feel guilty about motherhood. They frequently suppress their periods because it interferes with the work cycles, because our work cycles and our days off are created around the male form. Not that it is healthy for men, that's a different thing, but it's so much more damaging for women. In villages, even today, the entire farming community, if you look at it, they take a leave only when the women menstruate. Farming stops, everything stops. In Assam, we have the Ambubachi festival, where even today, all the shops and everything shut down because Mother Earth is considered as menstruating at that time. And women who are in sync with that cycle of Mother Nature will also menstruate at the same time. After I went to Kamakhya temple, for years, every time in that month, my period would sync with that of Ma Kamakhya. That's how delicate our cycles are and linked to nature's cycles. Which is why in ancient times, days off were not Sunday. How did the Sunday leave come in? That was introduced by the British in the late 1800s, because when they enacted the Factory Act, because our mills were producing much more than the London mills. And they would have to take Sundays off for the Mass. The Christians go to church on Sundays. And whereas our people took time off during Amavasya, when women menstruated, all those festivals, and otherwise, they worked throughout the week. Because your body does not require a Sunday off. But your body does require off when all your hormones are at an all-time low. And women's bodies and their energies can influence that of the men around them, which is why men followed women's cycles. Even if you must talk of equality, it is healthier for the human species if men imitated and followed the cycles of women rather than women trying to suppress their cycles and becoming like men. So in our context, even if we have to push for equality, it is good for both women and men to be in sync with the larger cycles of nature, which are reflected in women's bodies. That is the first thing. So please don't assume that the Western notion of equality and the lack of it is what leads to violence against women. That itself needs to be, questioned and contemplated upon. The second part, what then is the cause for violence? I have worked as a counselor with the Women's Helpline for a couple of years, and we would, obviously, the cases that we got were all about domestic violence and all forms of abuse against women. There would be times when a woman would come in all beaten up and we would look at her and assume that, yes, the way to go is the police and the legal route. So we'll say, okay, Domestic Violence Act, and let's file an FIR and all that. And then she would say, no, he's a nice person. We just want you to counsel him. Don't take any legal action. And then we would wonder what happened. Why is she saying that? When we would bring in the man, because we were a counseling center and you would listen to both sides, there were couples where when the man and the woman sit next to each other, without her even uttering a word, he would feel provoked to be violent towards her. And he would say that I don't want to be like this, but I don't know what it is about her that is making me behave in an aggressive manner. So what is actually going on here? I will tell you the biological basis of what happens. There is a portion of the brain called the amygdala. It is a small almond-shaped portion of the brain. This is the center that controls our fear and aggression impulses. So if we feel fear, the amygdala gets active and it makes you aggressive because you have to be able to counter the fear. And the amygdala acts on other parts of your body. So it acts on your sympathetic nervous system, which is what triggers your fight and flight response. It also alters your facial features. So if I'm sitting in front of you and I'm feeling fear, those of you looking at me, the amygdala in your brain will also trigger a fear response. So either you will attract more fear when you are fearful, or you will attract aggression as a result of countering that fear, because fear and aggression are two parts of the same coin. All those who are aggressive and violent by nature have an underlying quality of fear. It is the same amygdala which controls both. Now, we have this part of the brain that is about fear. Then we have the prefrontal cortex, which is your forehead region. That forehead region, the prefrontal cortex, its role is to help you have self-control, self-restraint, only if it is active. So there are studies which show that among serial murderers, among death row convicts, this prefrontal cortex region is not active enough. And that is why they are not able to control that impulse of aggression. And then there are studies which show that among those who practice yoga and meditation, the prefrontal cortex is a lot more active. Why? Because prana flows to this region. That is why we wear the kumkuma. That is what dhyana, pranayama and all of that does. It increases the flow of prana in this region. And that is why those who practice that have much greater capacity for self-restraint. So when we see incidents of violence, there are two things we need to understand. Most of us respond with fear. We have to break that cycle. Fear attracts more fear, more aggression, more violence. When Nirbhaya incident happened, en masse, all of us were just projecting fear. And by doing that, we are attracting more and more violence. How do you break the cycle of fear? The best way is yoga, because that transforms your vibrational pattern. You see, fear is an emotion which has a very low vibrational frequency. And the thing with vibrations are that we will attract similar frequency vibrations from those around us. So the high frequency vibrations are of love, or of compassion, or of seva. So if you have to break the cycle of fear, you have to make yourself capable of operating in the higher vibrational zone of love and compassion, because of which automatically fear dispels. Now, as a woman, your biological cycles, the times just before you menstruate and during your period, are such that your vibrational frequency will naturally be low. And that is why we recommended menstrual seclusion and protection for women and all of that. So Manusmriti didn't say protect women because of some social issue of patriarchy. They said it because they understood this underlying biology of women. We operate in our reproductive phase, we operate from the lower vibrational frequencies because we need that region of the body to be functional. But in the process, we more easily tend to draw others with the same low frequency vibrations, which could create problems. So this underlying phenomena is the subtle reason why violence exists, and exists much more in societies where people practice fear, practice aggression, and we promote that. We are not able to break away from that. The earlier speaker spoke about Swami Vivekananda. You take any of these great people of Bharat, what was transformative about them? It was not always their speech. It was that they operated from these high vibrational frequencies, and simply being in their vicinity transformed you. you stopped feeling fear. So when I say that all of us have to become Shakti, that is what we have to do. We have to consciously operate from a space of high vibrational frequency so that we elevate those around us. And that is how we can end violence. I've just touched upon the basics of this. It's a very deep and vast subject, but just to give you a glimpse of how we can understand this through our own Bharatiya Jnana Parampara in a way that the West has not even scratched the surface of.
I am really awestruck with the topics that we have touched. We have touched metaphysics, we have touched criminal jurisprudence, we have touched almost everything under the sun over here. Ma'am, you have spoken extensively on menstruation, and I have Yakshna Sharma coming up with a question, very pertinent question on menstruation itself. That is for you, ma'am.
Your book on Ritu Vidya, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Your book Ritu Vidya talks about embracing femininity and aspects associated with it. My first question is, should we initiate a research on how menstrual blood has healing properties since it has nutrition that is used to nurture the fetus? And my second question is that what can we as an organization, as a debating society only, as an organization, do to incorporate and make the most use of menstruation and to embrace the blessing that it is?
Thank you for those questions. Well, the first part about the research, it already exists, and you can look it up under the heading of stem cells and menstrual blood banking. This was something that got popular a few years ago because we have heard about banking the umbilical cord, because that also has stem cells. But you can only bank that when a woman gives birth, right? The umbilical cord is available only then. But menstrual blood is something available month after month. And the reason it is so important is because, as you said, it has highly regenerative properties, the stem cells of menstrual blood. And there was a lot of conversation about banking women's menstrual blood and having research that can use it to cure various diseases, Parkinson's, cancer. Even if you have to do an organ transplant, if you have the stem cells and those who are related to you by blood, it might provide matching stem cells. So there were a lot of conversations about this. It never really took off because of the difficulties of storage of stem cells. So that was a more practical thing, but there is existing research in that. So in our ancient systems, we understood this in a very different way. Menstrual blood contains the egg that is released. And within the body, prana is most concentrated in the human seed, in the sperm in men and in the egg in women. So when the egg is released through the menstrual blood, that contains copious amounts of prana. And that is why it was considered as very pure and very good. So that was a cultural way in which we understood. The second part of your question, without taking too much time, I will simply say this. If you want to do something as an organization, start allowing women to take a menstrual leave. Take a menstrual leave. We do not need Sundays off. It will not affect productivity because 2 or 3 days of menstrual leave, if you feel that productive hours are going away, then work on Sundays. Biologically, you don't need a Sunday off, but you do need the time off when you have your period. And when you do take that rest, menstrual rest, you come back in a much more productive and healthy way. And the next step would be to have men imitate the cycles of the women in their lives. It would be a lot more easier and healthier for them as well, because they would be influenced by the cycles of the women they are around. Also, when we menstruate, we lose prana. And when we lose prana, we tend to absorb it from our surroundings. So if there are people around us, and if you observe closely, the men especially would feel more irritated around menstruating women. They would feel more drained out. They would feel more tired because a menstruating woman will tend to draw prana from whoever is around her to herself. That is an added reason why menstrual seclusion used to be practiced. The modern science equivalent of this understanding is oxidative stress. Menstruation is a time when your body goes through oxidative stress. And when it goes through oxidative stress, it tries to make up for it by borrowing electrons from the nearby bodies. So we are literally sucking electrons from those around us, men or women, who are not menstruating. And then their bodies go through oxidative stress. So these things have to be understood. If you want to create workspaces that are in tune with our body's rhythms, then going for a menstrual leave is the first and the most sensible thing to at least offer women as an option. If you don't mandate it, it's fine, but at least give women that option.